the principal speaker. Sorry. Yeah, not a Hannah. I keep getting crosstalk on this for just a moment. I'm sorry, Cummers. What I want to do is welcome everybody to the meeting.
Can everybody mute except for give me a moment? Ah, that's better.
Okay. Yeah, I want to welcome all the comrades, and it's against a situation that none of us hoped would ever happen, because it involves people that we know, which makes it harder. The week before last, the regime, the so-called legal regime in Belarus, sentenced a number of people to jail terms, 1.5 to 4 years. We considered that they were barbaric in their own right. The people were representatives of, and elected representatives of, the Belarus Congress of Democratic Trade Unions. The democratic trade unions are alternative to the state union. The state union is simply an organization dominated by a mafia, the mafia at the head of it, of which is Alexander Lukashenko, the president. And even there's a dubious question about the integrity and authority of his presidency. But however, he does control the situation, and his regime controls the laws. The week just gone saw an increase in the savagery, in that a number of people who were in the leadership of one of the unions, the federated unions, the Radio and Electronic Workers Union, REP for short, the leaders of that were sentenced to sentences of 9 years with effectively hard labor for 9 years. Another comrade got a 9-year sentence with moderate conditions, and another comrade got 8 years. The crimes that these comrades, all the comrades, and so far now there's about 64 people who have been variously sentenced for trade union activity. The crime that they have committed is actually that, trade union activity, trying to organize trade unions independent of the state union and represent the members of those unions. The union premises have been wrecked and vandalized. Their records have been taken. Their equipment has been wrecked and stolen. And effectively, and very effectively, the state has repressed those unions. They have passed laws which have made the organizing of those unions to be considered as extremism. And extremism in its worst can actually mean a death penalty. And that was something that was in the mind of people watching the trials going on as well. What they have done in the case of the leadership of REP, and I'm focusing on them because of the savagery, rather than that they are any exceptional or unique. They are unique in the savagery that they have received. But they represent the whole of the trade union movement inside Belarus. But they also, because of their struggle for independent trade unionism, they represent each and every one of us involved in trade union activity throughout the planet. The worker of another country is a brother, as the boss of my own is a common enemy, is an old saying that's popular in the Irish trade union movement, and it's valid in this case too. What's also valid is the concern that while the death penalty wasn't passed on these comrades, because of their age and because of background or underlying, to use the popular phrase, underlying health conditions, under situation of the incarceration, has to be concern for the health and for the well-being and for the life of the individuals. Sometimes there's not much difference between starving somebody to death and shooting them. Simply, one is quicker than the other. Using medicine or withholding of medicine is another torture, which also raises concerns. The international trade union movement has been very lax publicly in terms of its opposition to the Belarus regime. Resolutions have been passed in various unions and various congresses. And the ILO, the International Labour Organization, has become involved. People were surprised when last year the ILO moved against Belarus for non-compliance with the statutes of the ILO, which include the right to organise, the right to represent, and the right to independent activity. The Belarus state denies all those things. And the ILO has expected, or is expecting, a response somewhere around the 6th or 9th of March. Hanna can probably be more specific. But in early March, they are expected to respond to the ILO. I can't predict what the response of the ILO will be, but I do have a concern that it is now 2003 since the ILO first raised the issue of Belarus. It was named with Thailand and some other, one of the primitive states. But for over 20 years, little or nothing has been done. And I'm not confident, or I'm not confident enough to believe that the ILO leadership, I'd love them, I'd really love them to make some decision, a decision that has an influence and does liberate the comrades and bring back their rights. But they're talking to an organization and a state that is led by the deaf. And behind Lukashenko is the shadow of Putin and the regime there. What I'm hoping today is that Hanna will give us an update on the situation. She is more in contact with the comrades of REP. Recently, Hanna was invited to Ireland to attend the international conference of the Global Power Unions, which is the international organization of electrical unions, of which REP has been accepted as a valid member. Hanna had the opportunity to address the conference, and the conference compile a resolution, which I understand is acceptable to Hanna. But again, and I have to be honest about this, there has been nothing in the media from the member countries of the global power unions. I know it's only a week since it happened, and trade unions are slow to respond because they have a procedure of going through executives and going through officials, and these things do take time. But I would sincerely hope that the silence of the moment are just simply procedural rather than anything else. I'm going to hand the meeting over to Hanna, and she will advise us and inform us as she normally does in an excellent manner. All yours, Hanna.
Hi, everyone. Hi, comrades. Well, we, as of the last week, well, thank you so much, Jimmy, for basically summarizing it so very in so much detail. I am in contact with those who remain mostly outside of the country because it's virtually impossible to talk to anyone in right now. I'm in contact with Gennadyi's wife, who's absolutely devastated because 9 years in a maximum security prison, that's basically a death sentence, given his state of health. Well, the general idea is that everyone is hoping that in March the ILO will actually do something, and which will something that will force the Belarusian regime to give in. But at the moment, it doesn't look like it, and they're just not giving in, because I don't think that the regime in Belarus is fully in control of what's going on, and also there is a sign, or there are a few signs, that they may be preparing to join the Russians in the war against Ukraine. So what they're doing to the independent union movement is basically they're trying to sort of close on any potential fifth column that they might see. The trial on our comrades is only the beginning, and the severity of the sentencing was expected. We kind of hoped that it wouldn't be that much, but it is. And REP, the reason is that REP has been a massive thorn in the regime's, well, everywhere since the 90s, because REP had previously organized lots of strike actions, lots of protests, starting from the 1990 when it was formed. And Gennadyi is basically the personal enemy of Lukashenko. So there's no surprise that he would go very hard on REP compared to everybody else, because so far REP leaders and activists, they get the worst sentencing of all. Nothing, not even close to everybody else. What we're hoping for is that the unions, which are the members of the global power unions, I sent the petition to Jimmy to Connect Union, I sent it to Paddy Kavanagh, I sent it to the Australians, I sent it to the IBW in Washington on the email that I had. And well, I asked for, I think I asked Paddy for everybody else's emails that I could send it to people, because I spoke, when I was at the conference, I spoke, for example, with Danish unions and Icelandic electrical unions, and they were all very supportive, but so far there's been no movement. And I spoke again to, well, with the help of the ETU, the Australian Electrical Union, we passed that resolution, we passed it to the ITUC. They had a Congress then in Melbourne, and that was passed by ITUC, but again, it's all just political statements and there's not much help. The problem is that without a lot of lobbying and pressure, the regime will not going to give in. We suspect that our comrades are basically held as bargaining chips, because Lukashenko, he bargains, and there's a lot for him that he can bargain on at the moment. Being an international pariah, he may well decide to use this card to get something out of the international community. So right now, I asked for, in the petition, I asked in the appeal that comrades around the world just liaise with their unions, with their union federations, with their national governments, so that pressure be put on Belarusian regime, so it has no other choice but to release our comrades. Because what they're doing, I mean, some of them got sentenced on articles which were created for this purpose and put into the penal code for that purpose, and some are on charges, like, for example, Zinaida Mikhnuk, she's in a penal colony for basically offending the president. There's no such charge in a criminal code, and yet she's got 2.5 years for that. And the RAB did not do anything unlawful. There was no unlawful activity. There was activity. Yes, there was a lot of defending of not even the members, just people who turned up, who had issues with the management, who had issues at the workplaces. RAB participated in many trials, and Gennadyi, being a lawyer as well, he trained he trained during the 90s as a lawyer. He specialized in employment tribunals, so he helped a lot of people to get fair treatment, to get justice with the workplace conflicts. I think the fear from the regime was that RAB during the 2020 protest became sort of the focal point of people who were left without any leadership, because those who claimed to be the leaders of protest, they very quickly departed abroad and left people without any leadership, anything. And people started coming to RAB because RAB had a reputation for helping people. So that's, really, it wasn't planned or anything like that, but we became a point where people started united against RAB. And I think that's another fear of Lukashenko, that somebody will unite against someone who can actually do, has authority to do something and will act upon that authority. So what we're seeing now is basically the destruction of independent trade union movement, and the yellow unions completely approved. That was they approved the union-controlled official trade union newspaper published a massive investigation sort of thing, saying, oh, well, they're not really independent. They all receive as a foreign grant, and they're not spending it on the unions, just, lining at their pockets and so on. So they fully supported that. And another thing we're actually asking from the unions all over the world, that to help basically push these yellow unions out, because they still represent Belarus in international federations. They still represent, even in the ILO, from the union side of things, they sit there with the Belarusian government. And how can they be there when they're not really unions? They're just another arm of the management. The person who is now in charge of those so-called Belarusian Federation of Trade Unions, he was a Lukashenko campaign manager for his last elections, and that's the award. He was basically given the position as the reward for basically participating in repressions against people. So this is the situation at the moment, and we're very much looking forward at what's going to be in March when the ILO has to list the sanctions against Belarus. We're really hoping for suspension, and then in June, if 2/3 of the ILO votes for it, then that will become a reality. But we are afraid that the ILO is not going to act upon the promises, because they are very good at promising, but then in the end, we just afraid that the sanctions are not going to be severe enough to push the regime to actually do something. So that's the situation at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Hanna. One thing just in relation to the ILO, it just occurred to me that the change in policy of the ILO from the waiting and sitting and watching for 20 years might be a reflection of a change in the leadership of the ILO, and that there's a new individual at the very top, and hopefully it reflects that the organization itself is beginning to wake up to its responsibilities. But having said that, I'm also conscious that it's representing governments and employers, as well as trade union organizations. So it has two monkeys on its back before it even starts, with the employers and the governments. I ask any comrade if they want to come in, make any contributions or ask any questions. everybody's shy. Ed, sorry, I see a raised hand here from Ed.
Well, I mean, thank you very much, Hannah, for informing us of this dreadful situation. And I haven't got really a contribution so much as a sort of a few questions, really, which hopefully will contribute to getting some discussion started. Can you tell us a bit more about the different oppositional trends there are in Belarusian politics? I mean, from what I understand, there's quite a range of opposition. You know, I mean, you've described very well the opposition for the working class. That's the trade union movement that we're part of is striving to develop. But there are also kind of, as I understand it, there are ex-communist groups from the Stalinist period, there are social democratic groups, there are liberals, there are conservatives, and there's some sort of nationalists who all of whom have different reasons for opposing the Lukashenko regime. I mean, it's not at all surprising that there should be a huge range of opposition groups coming from different motives and different political tendencies. In principle, according to the realities of Marxism, it's the trade unions and the working class that are in a position to pull the different strands of opposition together into something, you know, cohesive. But of course, as we've observed in this group for the last 2 years, the great potential that there was on the street for 2 years ago, and so the trade union movement has been, at least for the moment, it's been you know, it's been repressed. And so what I'm interested to know is what, you know, amongst civil society, amongst you know, in the workplaces where workers, you know, will meet and talk, even if it's unofficially, how much opposition is there still I mean, maybe underground and so on? How much another way of asking the question is that what is the scope that suddenly things can change and people could come out on the streets again, particularly if Lukashenko joins the war and then things start going badly for Russia as well as Belarus? You know, what I mean, it may not be 9 years before there's crowds banging at the prison doors trying to get people out who don't deserve to be in there. Is this me being too optimistic, or is it you know, is there something potential in that kind of idea? That's it.
Okay, right. Thanks, Ed. I'm going to take Ralph next, then followed by David and Finn.
Thank you, Hannah. You said that you had been talking with electrician from Denmark. Well, I have had some contact with, his name is Jørgen, and I know Jimmy know him also. But did he, what was the reaction from the chairman of the electricians in Denmark? Can I do anything to push him? I would like to hear your opinion about that. Thank you.
Okay, Hannah, I'll hold on and let Dave come in next. But
Okay.
in relation to Denmark, Jørgen is due to retire this year, and may in fact even be gone. So I don't know. I have no information on the new man I don't know whether Hannah was talking to either or both. But anyway, Hannah can answer that one. David, we'll let you in now.
Hanna, thanks so much, for your report and for giving us some of the feeling that we have for Gennadyi. I think we do need, and for Rep and for all the comrades who've suffered incarceration in one form or the other, a kind of brutal attack on independent trade unionism, in fact, on any genuine form of trade unionism in the country. I just want to mention, and I just remind comrades, I think Gennadyi has appeared at 4 or 5 of our discussions. He's a participant in WIN. He's someone who has put over the ideas that are mobilizing workers and resistance in Belarus. He's someone who has fairly good understanding, quite a comprehensive understanding of what's happening in Europe and elsewhere, and someone who, has been providing in a very careful and thoughtful way a real basis for opposition to the regime. Now, that has brought him, this sentence, which, as Hanna's explained, in a sense is a death sentence, because Gennadyi is not the most healthy of men and has a number of conditions. And I'm sure that the treatment he's getting is not designed, to lengthen his life in any way. I just want to ask comrades and appeal to comrades to do everything they can. I'll do what I can in seeing, trade unionists. I'll meet them tomorrow in Durban, and to put out the word. And I'm looking, I've got some photos of Gennadyi myself, but please send whatever material there is, which just gives a kind of chronology to show the 1990 period was a period important to South Africa. That's when, the ANC was unbanned. It was a time in which, the workers' movement was starting to rise internationally. And then we had every kind of setback on the way. But, we do need to, to get the word out that we've got to fight for each other. In the past, I've been imprisoned in Zimbabwe, and the interrogators would ask, who is this fellow called Dave Nellist? They hadn't a clue. They had an MP in Parliament. Dave Nellist at that time was one of the militant MPs, and it really got on their nerves. But it actually deflected some of the interrogation, some of the hatred that they had for us, because they knew someone was watching. And it's a terrible fact that the ILO has not moved, despite many resolutions from unions. The ILO has not moved to get Belarus out of the ILO in that position, and has also not removed the yellow unions. In fact, the disgrace is that the yellow unions are still in international mining unions and other federations, and that they're accepted despite the fact that they got Lukashenko elected, and that they are firmly behind the detention of someone like Gennadyi. I mean, we don't know how far we could possibly understand, the degradation of the idea of trade unions when you accept, fat cat businessmen and bureaucrats as representing workers. They just do not. But they have got a firm basis in the sense that the state requires all workers to be part of these state trade unions. Now, we have to explain these facts over and over again to be able to get clarity in people's thinking of what a genuine trade union is. I mean, we think we understand it, but obviously it's widely misunderstood internationally. Hanna, keep up the struggle. I know it's tough. We've been on this battle for quite some time. And Yuri, please, let's get the strike committees together and see what we can do to be able to raise the flag, to be able to defend our own, and to be able to get Gennadyi free. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask Finn to come in now, and then Steve behind him, and then we go back to Hannah then for a response on the previous speakers.
Thank you, comrades. I want to, at the outset, to thank Hanna for her contribution, which is very informative. And she certainly raised the urgency and emphasized the urgency of the need to process this issue in the international trade unions. In terms of Ireland, we've reached a kind of we need to unblock the process. And I just reflect on where we've got to date. Hanna addressed the meeting, as she explained, of the double power unions. Previously, she addressed a meeting of the Dublin Council of Trade Unions, where there was a very wide measure of support for the activity of the comrades in REP. And then we transmitted that information then through various unions, and the largest public service union, FORSA, as it's called, also supported the stance being taken by REP. We then had the matter raised on the Irish Congress of Trade Unions executive, where it was also discussed. But unfortunately, the process has reached some kind of an impasse, and we're trying to kickstart it again. And my questions are directed with that object in mind. How do we get this thing moving? Now, some of the obstacles that we've come now, Hanna has explained the urgency of the need to act, but there's big bureaucratic obstacles standing in our way. So the Irish Congress of Trade Unions officials, their first port of call will be the European Federation, the European Trade Union Confederation, and the ILO. They will ask at the European Council, the European Confederation, what action they should take. They won't take the advice of us, and I'm asking Hanna to help us in some way to get that process unblocked. Now, there are other trade union groups operating within within Belarus at the present time. Now, we support and we recognize the heroism and the steadfastness and the clarity of vision of REP. But I want to ask about the other competing opposition trade unions. Now, there is another group, I believe, which is very closely linked to Tikhanovskaya and her kind of bourgeois opposition group to Lukashenko. And these may be the trade union groups that the Irish bureaucracy will be influenced by. So I want to know a little bit more about them and where they are in terms of the support which they have. But like I said at the beginning, there's a global solidarity committee within the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, and we had a discussion recently with a number of comrades to see how we can reactivate that committee to bring the issues in Belarus back onto the center stage again. But I'm really looking for information to see when the Irish bureaucrats consult the European Trade Union Confederation, or for that matter, the ILO, on which they're represented and they do attend the meetings. What kind of ideas are they listening to from the European Confederation? And the other trade union opposition groups, what kind of a status do they have, and what kind of support do they have in these bodies, in the European Confederation or in the ILO? Now, with that information, we can go back to the bureaucracy and argue our case with them. But today's, from a formal point of view, we do have the support of the Dublin Council of Trade Unions and of the FORSA Trade Union, and to some extent, the executive of ICTU, Irish Congress of Trade Unions. But it's a formality. It's based on resolutions that have been passed, an agreement that has been reached, but no action is being taken by any of those bodies. Now, we can reactivate the Dublin Council of Trade Unions, and through that, try to get our influence stimulated in FORSA and in Irish Congress of Trade Unions. But towards that end, we need a bit more information about the other so-called opposition trade unions. And I hope Hanna can answer my question in that regard to facilitate us in our argument in support of the campaign, which she has explained very well. We're all in complete agreement, of course, with the need to release the prisoners. That's not an issue at all. Nobody's going to argue that it should be kept. We're in favor of all the trade union activists being released. But I'm just asking, what kind of obstacles are we going to meet from people who argue for other trade union confederations, and the importance of not emphasizing, they put on the other trade union confederations and less so on REP. So hopefully Hannah can clarify that question a bit to facilitate us in our attempts to kickstart the process in the Irish trade union movement.
Thanks, Finn. One of the things that Finn spoke there about the movement in the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. I'm very, very pleased to say that the union that I'm a member of myself, Connect Union, the Electrical Engineering Union, was one of the first unions to respond to appeals from REP and provided material and financial support at a time when there was no law against it. And this has raised a problem now that with the suppression of the unions, it's going to box in the union movement nationally and internationally. And those of us who support the Belarus trade unionists and unions will have to box a little bit cleverer in getting material and financial support organised for the unions. I'm going to ask Steve to come in next, and then we'll follow that with Hannah. Now, there's no other comrades signalling yet, and I would ask, while those two comrades are speaking, if other people would give me an indication of their desire to contribute. So Steve first, and then Hannah.
Thank you, comrades, and I'd just like to thank Roger and Wynne for organising this meeting. I think it's such an important meeting, a meeting which maybe the left is not taking up in, I'm talking about England, not about Ireland, but in England, is not taking up this question, because I think Belarus and Ukraine are connected together. They are almost so bound together that we need to link them in our arguing. They're almost seen as two separate issues. And in one case, you can think that the way it's presented, that Putin is fighting against NATO and America, is invading Ukraine, and he's fighting a defensive war. And on the other hand, many of us socialists are rallying to the defense of the Ukrainian people and their right to self-determination and all those other things, right, etc. But that's like seen as one issue. And then we have something else going on over there in Belarus. But if we think of Putin as waging an anti-democratic war, he's waging that anti-democratic war in Russia. He was waging that anti-democratic war in Belarus. He's waging it in Kazakhstan, and he's waging it in Ukraine. And so all of these places where there are democratic movements of people trying to get a more democratic and open societies, they're all connected somehow or other. And so I think that what we should be doing is linking. I mean, I think that if the democratic movement in Belarus hadn't been crushed, Putin's ability to have invaded Ukraine would have been severely set back. Certainly wouldn't have been able to invade very easily from the north. So the defeat of the Belarusian democratic movement, it seems to me, was key to one of the factors that enabled Putin to invade Ukraine. So I'm thinking that in some ways, we're unsure on the left, how can we take up a strategy for peace in Eastern Europe? Well, I think Belarus is one of the keys to this. That we should be supporting, say that the way for the Ukrainian working class to get towards peace is to link up with the Belarusian movement. And I'm sure that's already happening. I don't know enough about it to say whether it's happening or not, but just, it seems to me the Belarusian opposition and the Ukrainian working class we must find ways to help them link together in whatever way they can. Now, I'm not involved in these campaigns that the comrades have been informing us about, so I'm speaking in one hand from ignorance, but I do think that strategically, we who are defending the Ukrainian working class should be linking those up to the defense and of the Belarusian working class. And I think by linking the two together, I think we can possibly make more progress than them keeping it another separate topic.
Thank you, Steve. Just for information, Steve, Unite is one of those unions representing electrical workers in the UK, and they're an affiliated body to the global power unions and participated in the conference that Hannah was at. So maybe if Hannah gave you information on who was there, it might be possible for British comrades to start working on Unite on the basis of direct connection with the arguments. The other thing is rising from a comment by Finn in relation to the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. I got some satisfaction recently from individual members of the Congress executive in conversations speaking about Ukraine. They reflected very much an attitude that they supported the rights of the Ukraine people, but it hasn't gone without notice what the regime of Zelensky has done in a legislative term to the Ukrainian trade unions. So there's a consciousness and a conscious awareness that sympathy for Ukraine does not necessarily mean satisfaction with the leadership in Ukraine, and it's a good way to be. Hanna, I'll bring you back then, and again I would ask any comrades intending to speak to help me by signalling early. It's all yours, Hanna.
Okay, right. In response to the questions, right. Well, I'll start with Ed. Well, Ed, there are quite a few trends in. Oh gosh, that's the wrong way. Again. There are quite a few trends in the Belarusian opposition. Always has been. And I think that I'll ask Yuri to help explain this here. But yes, most of the parties which claim to be independent, they're not. They were created essentially by Lukashenko or by people close to him. So they are, although some of them claim to be independent, and both on the left and in the center, most of them, they're really not. So yes, there is a nationalist movement on the right, and that's probably remained the strongest of all over the years, although they have their own underwater currents among themselves. So yeah, let me just give the word to Yuri to explain that to you in a bit more detail, because he represents the one of the sort of federation that we tried to create, the Belarusian Congress, Belarusian Democratic Congress, which is basically built out of the left and center left parties. And so he'll probably be explaining better on that. Yuri, if you could explain, and then I'll continue with the questions.
Okay, Yuri, your hand is up anyway.
Анна, я прошу прощения, сказать у всех, к сожалению, я еще нехорошо говорю по-английски, я буду просить вас перевести, так и скажите, попросите всех.
Okay, so Yuri is apologizing because his English is not up to, is not fluent yet, so he would ask me to translate. He'll speak in Russian and I'll translate that.
Я того, что услышал, так что на сегодняшний момент с оппозицией, действующей в Беларуси, обстановка стоит, мягко выражаясь, очень грустная. Может, вы частями?
At the moment, we have a very sad trend with regards to opposition in Belarus.
Ситуация напоминает, наверное, прошлый век, практически 1937 год, когда активные люди вынуждены, то есть сидят уже в тюрьме, кто-то зачищенный, а тот, кто смог, успел, они находятся в миграции.
So it basically reminds us of the beginning of the last century in Russia, when the majority of activists have been imprisoned, and the rest, those who managed to escape, are now in emigration.
Поэтому мы все, надеюсь, понимаем, что, конечно, это все под давлением Путина, Российской Федерации, которая пытается восстановить Советский Союз, как он, наверное, спит и видит, и это основная проблема.
And as we understand, this has all been done under the pressure from Putin, who is trying to restore the Soviet Union as he sees it. And that's the main problem, the main obstacle to us.
Люди, которые имели опыт работы с рабочими Беларуси, такие как Fiadynich, Gennadyi, профсоюз рэп, или такие опытные политики, кстати, к сожалению, они не могут сейчас никак влиять на ситуацию. И поэтому задача номер один, как я считаю, нужно сделать на это упор международным каким-то давлением, чтобы этих людей освободили и дали возможность какой-то демократии и профсоюзному движению. Потому что без этих людей я не уверен, что может происходить что-то реальное в хорошем смысле этого слова.
And the tragedy is that those people who have the authority among the workers and who have the expertise and the experience of working with people, with the working class and with people of various occupations, such as Gennadyi Fiadynich and such popular politicians as Nikolai Statkevich, they are imprisoned and they can't really influence the situation at the moment. So what is really needed, and the pressure points on the international movement, is that these people must be freed and that any sort of democratic process be allowed in Belarus in order for any changes to take place.
Я скажу вам, как официально и представитель профсоюза РЭП радиоэлектронной промышленности, и как член Белорусского конгресса демократического, помните, который объединяли всех ведущих политиков Беларуси. Данная ситуация разразнила людей, и многие находятся, белорусские политики, активные люди в разных странах. Они, к сожалению, разъединены, разрознены и слабы. Поэтому нужно поддержать, чтобы снова каким-то образом сформировать костяк, который сможет это делать. Люди, к сожалению, бессильны, слабы, по крайней мере.
And as from the point of view of the radio electronics, the Belarusian Radio Electronics Union, and also as a representative of the Belarusian Democratic Congress, the organization which united all the prominent politicians in Belarus, I can tell you that at the moment, people who are outside of Belarus, they are fragmented. And that's another tragedy, because people need to get together, and we need to do something to sort of put them together to recreate the core, which will be able to act to actually instigate any changes that may lead to freeing people in Belarus.
К сожалению, сейчас Беларусь оказалась в таких условиях в зависимости от России, что инициативы, энергии, желания активных людей, профсоюзных, будет недостаточно без помощи, поддержки извне, которые действительно смогут каким-то образом что-то помочь собраться, чтобы можно было сплочить людей, снова работать. Без помощи извне, я считаю, это будет очень просто. Спасибо.
And we are in a situation where Belarus is completely dependent on Russia, which basically means that the will and the desire of the union people is not enough to create these, to recreate the democratic opposition, and the external support is vital here. And without that external support, in my mind, it would be impossible to recreate the viable opposition.
И на что еще обратил внимание, в этом случае, конечно, нужно действовать осторожно. Я бы доверял тем проверенным, известным людям, опытным, авторитетным, которые были в Беларуси, потому что я понимаю, что белорусские и российские службы, они, как говорится, не глупые, будут пытаться делать какую-то альтернативу себе подконтрольную с новыми людьми. И поэтому нужно наших лидеров, которых мы все хорошо знаем, защищать, пытаться поддержать, и тогда мы сможем действительно делать какую-то плодотворную работу. Спасибо. Я думаю, что больше добавлять ничего.
In my view, we need to be also very careful who we work with and trust him. And I personally would only trust those people who've been old politicians who've been known to have been in a real opposition, because the security forces in Belarus and in Russia, they're not stupid, and they would try to organize new opposition, which is controlled by them, with new people controlled by them and presented as the real alternative, as the real opposition. So we need to focus our efforts on helping our leaders to get out of jail, so they would actually be able to recreate that core. So, and not really easily trust those who claim to be coming instead of. So that's the opinion.
Спасибо, не добавить больше нечего. Если есть какие-то вопросы, с удовольствием, Анна, при вашей помощи, может, попытаемся ответить.
So this is all I wanted to say, and if there are any questions, then obviously I'll be happy to answer.
Okay, thank you, Yuri, and thank you, Hannah.
You're welcome.
Hannah, do you want to carry on?
Yes,
your own
I'd like
contribution?
to carry on. Yes,
Yeah.
to basically build on what Yuri just said. Yes, the Belarusian opposition, which is now outside the country, is fragmented, and there are a few centers which emerged in the last years. Me personally, I would not trust the people who call themselves the new opposition, because they've been known, they've been known to have affiliations with the security forces, directly or indirectly, and that's why people from the sort of old opposition who've been, trusted and checked by time, they would not work with them. Also, in terms of trade union, what we have now is there's this new movement. So far, I'm not sure how many people are there, but there are 2 people there who basically managed to escape from Belarus. The problem is that the political stance, we know one of them, we know Lisa Merlak, she was once here speaking to us. The problem is that for whatever reason, they're very segregated, let's put it this way, because I tried contacting them and saying that REP would like to sort of be a part of the Union Federation, or whatever they want to call them. Never got a response, actually. So that makes me a bit suspicious, because these are the people who were not arrested, who were allowed to leave the country. And we know that Lukashenko doesn't allow to leave the country if there's no link. Obviously, there are a few political parties now who work inside Belarus, and they claim to be in the opposition. However, I spoke to comrades who I can trust, and they are very suspicious of them as well, because they're saying, look, some of them, one of them, they call themselves the Social Democratic Party. Again, they are, the person who is their former leader was one of the presidential candidates at the last election, and he's allowed to walk free, which makes everyone very suspicious, because when everyone's imprisoned, someone's walking free and calling himself a new opposition. Well, that's suspicious. And that's the suspicion. This is a massive problem. It is we don't really know who in the new opposition can be trusted. So and that's why we are focused so much on helping the people who are known to be in real opposition to Lukashenko get out of jail. Because, and these are the people who will be able to unite everyone around them, because, Gennadyi Fiadynich has a lot of authority among the opposition, and Nikolai Statkevich, he has a lot of authority, and these are the people who are known to everyone and who basically spend their lives fighting against the regime. So that's another reason why we actually need them out, because they can take these fragmented groups and put them together as one movement. So, and without them, it's pretty impossible. Answering to Ed's question, how come people can go in the streets? Well, if there is no leadership, there will be no streets. And right now, the security forces in Russia and Belarus, KGB infiltrated pretty much everyone in that new opposition. So they will not going to do anything which is not really supported by Moscow. Obviously, they'll scream and shout and make all these loud statements, but reality is they're not gonna move. So yes, we need our leaders out, and then sure, people there is a possibility of people going in the street. Yes. So I hope that answers the question. With Ralph, yes, as Jimmy said, Jorgen is retiring. So, but he brought another Jorgen with him, who was taking over. And there were people there, not just from Denmark, there were people from Nordic Federation of Electricians Unions, which I think unites Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Iceland. So they were all there. So, but I think if it's possible to work with the Danish union, them and the Norwegians, I think they will play the major role, because they were the most active, at least at the conference. So if we could get their support in that, and basically work from there. So, I mean, if we can get back in direct touch, it would be very good, and I'll be very grateful for that. And so, again, following to the Finn's question, well, the main obstacles, again, are this fragmentation and the lack of trust at the moment, because we're still sorting out, who we can trust. But then I think there's a lot of external opposition to what's going on, and many governments are very indecisive in what they're actually doing, because it's very easy to do political statements and say, yes, we support you, but doing something which is actually gonna lead to real outcomes, that's a completely different story. I mean, we tried talking to Amnesty International, who very quickly put our comrades on the political prisoners list, but not much else. And they're not moving. They're not lobbying. They're not really not doing anything much. And that's the main obstacle. So them and then the fragmentation within the Belarusian opposition. I mean, this new movement which calls itself Solidarność, and they claim to be the sort of descendants of the Belarusian Federation of Democratic Unions. But again, I asked people, I know some of those people, and I asked them, guys, do you mind Rep joining? And I got silence. So whether they being coerced or influenced because they still have families back in Belarus, I don't know, but that's all. I mean, I'm in a bit of a limbo with them at the moment. And with well, Steve, if you can let us talk to Unite. There were 3 people from Unite at the conference. There were the national officers there, and they have my contacts. They do have my contacts. They never responded. They said that they would pass them on to some relevant people within the union. Honestly, never heard back. So again, I know British unions are slow, but that's probably slower than slow. So that's where we are.
Okay. The only thing I'd like to add to what Hanna said is that in relation to the members of the Scandinavian unions, I have found that the youth are very, very important people, particularly the Norwegian youth and the Swedish youth. And it would be worthwhile for Rolf to make contact with them, and I'll try and get through whatever records I have or phone numbers. I'll pass them on to you. What I'm going to do now is I have Steve and Roger up, and I'm going to call Steve in first, and then I'm going to ask Roger in, but I'm going to put Roger on the spot and ask him from the point of clarification, to explain the position of WIN supporters in relation to Ukraine, because sometimes there can be concern that we focus too much on Belarus and forget about the neighbours. So Steve first.
It's just carrying on from part of what I said before. In England, there's massive sympathy for Ukraine, not obviously because the state itself, the government is sending tanks and sending, I don't know, Boris Johnson and goodness knows what else. Plus the fact that many refugees, have been supported by ordinary people and put up in their houses and things like that. So in the Labour Party and the trade union movement, there is massive sympathy and horror about what's going on in Ukraine. And it's a sympathy that's amongst working class people. But obviously this is seen through the prism of Zelensky and the Tories and all the rest of it. That's the problem. But what I'm suggesting is that if we want to try to advance the cause of the Belarusian working class, we have a natural lever in there, I think, in the movement by linking it in with Ukraine and saying, well, you say you're sympathetic for Ukraine, but what are we doing about Belarus? Why is that being ignored, et cetera, et cetera? So I'm sort of arguing that we should be taking that popular sympathy for Ukraine and linking it back in towards Belarus and the Belarusian opposition, because it is contradiction. We're supposed to be engaged in this battle with Putin, apparently. And if that's happening, well, why the hell isn't nobody doing anything about the crushing of the Belarusian opposition? And it allows there to be an independent working class point of view. In other words, the Belarusian working class and the Ukrainian working class. It's not about Zelensky. It's about the workers of these two different countries finding ways to link up and support each other. So that's all I want to say.
Okay, thanks again, Steve. Roger?
Well, yes, comrade. First of all, I want to say that it really is a great honor for us and for WIN to welcome these comrades from Belarus, not just today, but, to welcome Hanna and Yuri, but not just today, but a couple of years ago we had, as David said, we had a whole series of meetings with comrades from Belarus, heroic worker organizers like Gennadyi and several other comrades who we really learned enormously from their experiences, and we felt a great kind of upsurge of solidarity and also of our understanding of the situation and our admiration for the heroic struggle that they were putting up. And I can't stress that too strongly. And I would like to say from that we remember we have to put this in the context of the events of 2 years ago, when there was a huge mobilization, a sustained uprising of the population of Belarus, which was really, it was for several months. It was the most turbulent outbreak of revolution that we could see anywhere in the world, and of course certainly in Europe. And week after week after week, thousands, tens of thousands, I think sometimes hundreds of thousands were on the streets and were facing the brutality of Lukashenko's thugs. And of course that movement was defeated, and the immediate outcome of that is the horrific penalties that have been inflicted on comrades like Gennadyi and many, many more comrades besides. But let's remember that this repression is also a sign of the panic and the sign of despair on the part of Lukashenko and the regime there, that they are terrified of the movement that was unleashed in those days, and they're particularly also terrified by the kind of leadership that comrades like Gennadyi and the leaders of REP gave to that movement, of a real opposition, of a real workers' opposition, and not the kind of stooge regime or stooge wannabe regime, if you like, that was represented by Tikhanovskaya and so on. Although, of course, we also stand against any kind of repression and any kind of reprisals against any of the opposition to this thuggish, brutal regime of Lukashenko. But remember, that comes into the context too of turmoil and turbulence throughout the whole region and throughout the whole former Stalinist world too. Remember the uprising, equally heroic and equally brutally put down in Kazakhstan, not long after the events in Belarus. And let's remember also in Russia, again and again and again, despite the fact that the regime does have an iron grip for the moment on the population, but nevertheless there was an uprising in Siberia, which in one region in Siberia, which lasted for several months, where the Putin regime could not impose its will, and we've seen all kinds of signs of discontent and of a bubbling possible imminent revolt, or maybe not imminent tomorrow, but nevertheless, the seeds for revolution are there too. We see, for instance, that when Russia tried to impose, or when it did impose, a serious mobilization, 300,000 people were mobilized and conscripted, and they're talking now, whether it's true, I don't know, but of the possibility of 500,000 more. But there was a huge exodus from the country of young people who were determined to try to avoid the draft. And we see also the conditions that the conscripts, from what little bits of information are filtering out. But nevertheless, we see that conscripts are being sent almost unarmed, almost defenseless, and being used as simply as cannon fodder, and it's sowing the seeds of really burning hatred and resentment against the Putin regime. And the Putin regime does have the hallmarks of a dying elite, of a dying ruling clique, more and more isolated from reality, and more lashing out in blind rage. So I think we need to keep all these points in mind in discussing it. It's not directly related, but I think we should also say there's another example we saw that we discussed last week in relation to China, that even the very relatively stable and powerful regime in China, they also saw an upsurge of revolts for the first time since 1989, which shows that there is no regime in the world today which is secure and safe from the movement from below. Now, Jimmy asked me to say something about Ukraine, and I don't want to open up what would be another debate. We have debated it, and I think it's very important that we debate it yet again. But I do think that we need to say that just as we've extended solidarity with the workers of Belarus and of Kazakhstan and of Russia, we also extend our solidarity with the working class of Ukraine, which is suffering the most appalling and horrific attacks from the Russian invasion. And we have been accused by some people, completely falsely and completely without foundation, of somehow defending the Putin regime. On the contrary, the Putin regime is the center of a web of reaction. It gives support to fascist and repressive and reactionary groups around the world, and we absolutely see the defeat of the Putin regime as one of the most important tasks of the working class internationally. We have to say Russia, yes, hands off the Ukraine and immediate withdrawal of the occupation forces. But that does not mean that we have to give any kind of support, even conditional support, to NATO and to the ruling class of Ukraine. We are in solidarity with the people of Ukraine, or the working class of Ukraine, in defense of their democratic rights. But we have no trust in NATO, in the EU, in Biden, in Zelensky, in any of the fair weather friends, if you like, from the ruling class, who have no interest in actually in helping the working class to gain any victories. We have to recognize that we don't know what is the attitude and the situation of the peoples of the eastern Ukraine, who were, without a doubt, were also subject to repression from the Ukrainian from the Ukrainian government and from the reactionary and fascist forces that were operating under the aegis of the Ukrainian government. And so we have to say, not that we don't take the side either of the Russian or the Ukrainian regime. We say we stand for the self-determination for the peoples of Donbass and of Crimea, even more so of Crimea, which was always part of Russia. I don't want to get into a historical debate on this, but self-determination for the peoples of Donbass on the basis of a genuinely democratic referendum, that there must be complete mutual demilitarization of the border territories on either side, and above all, unity of the workers of Russia and Ukraine and of Kazakhstan and of all the countries of the region in the struggle to overthrow their corrupt reactionary oppressors. And I think that that's a position that we can be proud of. It's a position of workers' internationalism in the best traditions of Marxism. So I'd just like to end on that point, that particularly also, if, as is rumored, Belarus is dragooned into the war in alliance with the Putin regime, then that cannot but undermine still further the foundations of the Lukashenko regime. If the Russian conscripts are discontented and possibly tending towards a mutinous state of mind, then the same thing, all the more so, would be true of the population of Belarus, who must be seething and groaning under the oppression inflicted on them since their uprising of a couple of years ago. And therefore, I think we have to be prepared for sharp turns and for surprises, and we might see much sooner than might appear apparent at the present time. We might see a resurgence of the movement of the working class against these disgusting, revolting, oppressive regimes of both in Belarus and in Russia. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks, comrades.
Okay, thanks, Roger. Ian, I see your name up. I'll give you a call on first.
Hi, management.
Hannah, I just want to. Ian was flashing there for a while, and I want.
Oh yes, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, his hand is down again at the moment. Ian, do you want to come in? No, oh, it's okay. Okay, Hannah, it's going back to you. And as I pass back to you, there's something in my mind that I just want to ask the comrades to remember, that during the massive demonstrations that took place in Belarus, the dominant force in those demonstrations was womanhood. It was young women, old women, all over the regions and the cities, marching against the oppression. And it was a tribute not just to womanhood, but to humanity. So you're a representative of those people as well, Hannah. I saw you blush too.
Women, we are active, but women get prosecuted and women get under these repressions no less than men, to be honest, in Belarus. Well, I just wanted to sort of add a bit to what Stephen Roger was saying, is that you see, the Belarusian democratic unions condemned the war. And I think it was used by the regime as one of the reasons to start this wave of destruction of the unions, that they openly condemned the Ukrainian war. The problem is that right now, if Belarusian authorities are allowed to get away with it, we might see similar crushing of not just opposition, but of any democratic trade union movement all over the region. The reason is that Belarus is frequently used by the Russians as sort of a dry run for whatever they are planning on doing. For example, in 2017, when Belarusian regime introduced the social parasite law, well, the Russian Duma, the parliament, was debating to introduce it again, but they saw the reaction in Belarus, such a massive popular opposition to the law, they never introduced it. So again, I think that what's happening is not just that Lukashenko is cleaning up those who he thinks might oppose him or might do something to get people out in the streets to oppose the war. It's that the Russians are cleaning up space, and they are looking at the same time at the reaction from the international community on whether there are any concrete movements against that, of what is going to happen to Belarus as a result of it. And if there is nothing serious that's going to happen to Belarus as a result of it, if there is no punishment, the violation of the workers' rights, I think what we might see very quickly is the same thing happening in Russia. Because there are some of the unions which are still, there are two federations in Russia, and one of them is an independent federation which is being repressed, but they haven't been criminally prosecuted yet. And I think that they will be if the Russians will see that nothing's happening. And as for the Ukrainians, well, the workers in Ukraine are very fragmented. And the unions in Ukraine, they haven't been strong before the war, and they're not now. So the thing about connecting Belarusian and Ukrainian workers is that, yes, common people will probably be very happy to do so. They will be connected. The problem is to connect the Ukrainian unions to actually the right people, because Ukrainians are very distrustful of Tikhanovskaya and the company. There have been quite a few articles in the Ukrainian press and the Belarusian opposition press. They were copied from the Ukrainians. They're openly saying, well, how can we trust those people if they're so ridden with KGB agents? Can't work with them. Yes, the Ukrainian ultra-right do work with the Belarusian ultra-right. On that front, they have complete unity. But again, can we work with the ultra-right? I really doubt so. Because they have their own nationalistic agenda, which may not be suitable for which people are not going to support. But at the moment, what we see, the alternative is either the Tikhanovskaya, it's her pseudo government, which is basically controlled by the Russian and Belarusian security forces, or the ultra-right opposition, which is based in Warsaw mostly, and where the Ukrainians are coming as well. So that's the two sides, two alternatives which are now. So that's why there is a massive need in the third force, in this third force, which will be coming from the left, which will be coming from the social democratic side. But again, this one was made impossible by the people being jailed, because those figures of authority who could do that, they're now in jail. I mean, we can obviously get a few, there are a few comrades who are out, who managed to escape, like, for example, Vasily Zavadsky, who was the chairman of REB beforehand, and he was present, and I think at a few of the meetings here with WIN. I'm in contact with him, and he said, sure, but who are we going to gather around us? So we need to sort of have a gathering force again and try to get people, but most of the people are in Belarus. We need to try to get them out somehow. And that puts another massive pressure on the political and on the financial issues, because Tikhanovskaya and her company they were very successful in basically getting every single financial channel, grabbing it and defending it from anyone they see as the potential competition, and that includes the unions. And now there's a new union, which the Solidarność movement, which I'm not sure if they're affiliated with Tikhanovskaya, but they're certainly not opposing it. And these guys are now trying to present themselves as the descendants of the BKDP. And again, they're pushing everybody else out. So that's where we are at the moment. That's why we it's not just on the human side of it, which is important, but the political side of getting people out and getting them to actually help rebuild, that's paramount. And these are the people who have respect of the Ukrainian working class as well. And I'm sure that the Ukrainians will be happy to join forces with them. And they're not happy to join forces with whoever came now, again, except for the ultra-right, but they have their own sort of community. So that's where we are. And that's the situation which needs to somehow be resolved.
Okay,
That's what I wanted to comment.
Right, Hannah. I got to ask if any other comrade wants to come in with closing remarks or contributions or equally important questions. No, it's silent. What I'm going to say is I personally want to thank Hannah for her contribution today and for Yuri for his contribution. I hope to be seeing more of both comrades in these and further discussions. And the one thing that I would say by way of lesson is that everybody that's on this platform here today is a wiser person as a result of the information and quality of the contributions given to us. We have a challenge individually and collectively to bring these ideas, these questions, these answers back to the trade union movement, because it is my understanding, and I'm sure that most of the comrades will agree, it is only the trade union movement that will decide this on behalf of workers internationally, what support, what pressure, what solidarity can be given to the comrades in Belarus and to the working class in Belarus and indeed other places. But the one lesson that we must learn is we don't leave it to others, that individually we take on a question and responsibility of taking the ideas, even if it's a simple thing like contact your local union branch, contact an official in the area, a politician with a trade union background, just to spread the ideas and try and engage and make people more aware, and in turn ask them to carry through the responsibilities that they claim to have. With that, I'm going to cause this part of the meeting to an end and pass back to Roger to inform us of next week and the week after meetings that are planned.
Right, yes, comrades. The another absolutely inspiring struggle that is taking place at the present time is that in Iran. This countrywide uprising of really a whole population, but led particularly by the women and the girls of Iran against the brutal repression of the regime. And we're very proud to have an Iranian comrade, Aman, who some of the comrades know already. He's going to give us an update, a report. He's in daily contact with his comrades back there, and he's going to give us an update on that movement. So I think, as far as the week after is concerned, perhaps David would like to say something.
Sorry, Roger, I just misheard, or in fact, I didn't hear your last few comments.
I was saying, as far as the week after next, perhaps David would like to make a comment.
Yeah, okay. Is David's mic active? David?
Well, if he's not, I'll just, is he not there? I'll just give notice that he is organising a meeting of dock workers in Durban in South Africa, and also inviting comrades, dock workers from USA and from Europe to an international dock workers conference. So we will be joining them for one session of their conference. That's also quite a landmark event for us. So next week Iran, week after the international dock workers struggle based in South Africa.
Thank you, Roger. Okay, comrades, we've called this meeting to an end, and I leave it with the words that I mentioned earlier. Please don't leave it to somebody else. Take the message away ourselves. Thank you, comrades.
Thanks, comrades.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Yuri.